The two most important factors that we found that affected gobbling activity were the amount of early successional cover across the property and the proportion of bottomland hardwood forest. Fire is not what's causing turkey declines.
Having fire, you have turkeys. Having fire is allowing them to be there. And if you subtract fire, they won't be there. Welcome to Wild Turkey Science, a podcast made possible by Turkeys for Tomorrow. I'm Dr. Marcus Lashley, Professor of Wildlife Ecology at the University of Florida.
And I'm Dr. Will Gulsby, Professor of Wildlife Ecology and Management at Auburn University. We're both lifelong hunters and devoted scientists who are passionate about hunting, managing, and researching wild turkeys.
In this podcast, we'll explore turkey research, speak to the experts in the field, and address the difficult questions related to wild turkey ecology and management.
Our goal
is to serve as your connection to wild turkey science. There he is.
What's up?
Man, it looks like you're about to go snow skiing or something.
Man, I can't do the cold anymore. I feel like the older I get, the softer I am.
Blood is getting thin.
It is.
Well, you know, we're continuing on with this thing, and folks are still finding places for us to expound upon.
We've been getting lots of questions lately, I feel like.
I know. I think,
which
you know
I
what
like.
I think?
I enjoy.
I think there's a bunch of folks sitting on a deer stand, and they've been thinking about this stuff.
Yeah.
And we're getting a lot of questions because of that.
Well, it makes me happy that they're using their time that they're wasting on a deer stand to think about turkeys. It makes it somewhat productive. I'm just I was sitting in a deer stand. I was sitting in a deer stand this last weekend. Well, I was going to
say, you definitely were not wasting your time this past weekend on a deer stand.
No.
So do you want to tell us about that?
Yeah, it didn't go according to plan at all, but it ended up being way better than the plan. So,
well, that's good.
So, yeah, there's a
I
friend
saw some evidence that it went real well.
Yeah, so a friend of ours in southeast Alabama, Craig, is, you know, he's invited us out several times to come hunt, and we hunted out there several times last year. And in fact, Ellie shot her first deer on his property, which was a doe, and that was in January of 2025. And then she shot her second deer, which was that mature buck that she killed last year on the last weekend of the season. And, you know, completely unexpected, but definitely welcome and a phenomenal experience. And then she just shot her third deer last weekend. So she's killed 3 deer in 2025 So it was, you know, the first two
more deer than I've killed in 2025.
Me too. but the, you know, because the first two were the end of last season, and then, you know, the third one was at the beginning of this one. But it was opening week of bow season down there, and we went down and took the whole family. And the plan was, because they have a blast, you know, the kids just have a blast being down there, and they ride their bikes, and they shoot BB guns and real guns and bows, and play in the dirt mounds or the lime pile or whatever, sitting around, throw rocks out of the gravel pile, go down in the creek, get clay, you know, just be feral. And so we brought them along with us, and the plan was, you know, I was going to hunt some, and my wife was going to hunt some because it was bow only, and didn't even really think about the option of a crossbow. And then we got down there, and then Craig said, "I have a crossbow." He said, "So if any of y'all want to hunt with my crossbow, like, I don't care, just let me know." And he mentioned something about, you know, maybe Ellie wanting to use it, and, you know, so I kind of floated that to her, and as soon as I did, it was just, you know, she was all in. She was done. Yes, like, I'm hunting now. So
yeah, you're no longer a hunter.
No, so it was like the first afternoon we got down there, I knocked the dust off the bow, and, you know, was slinging some arrows and stuff like that, and getting all ready. And then a little while later, I'm just putting up my bow in the case and saying, "Well, that's over with," because Ellie found the crossbow. And so we went out in the yard, and she shot it a few times, and I'm telling you what, man, have you shot one of those like new generation crossbows?
No,
It is incredible.
I
It
have
is
heard that.
absolute. I've heard that too, but until I did it myself, and Craig's a big compound bow hunter too, and he specifically bought this crossbow as a non-invasive way to achieve his doe harvest, and it shoots like a laser.
Wow.
I mean, because we had been shooting compounds, and I've got a pretty fast compound, and it just pales in comparison. So
Yeah.
we got out there in the yard and shot it several
So
times. I've dropped
describe
it.
it to me. Is it like one of the reverse limb new
No, it's
generation, or
this.
is
It's
it
got the typical. Uh, it's
the
got the
typical
typical
frame? Yeah.
frame, but it is one of those like narrow profile ones. The limbs are only about like 9 inches long.
Oh wow.
It's
Okay.
insane. And
Yeah,
then
the one that I have is definitely not new generation, and it's super
yeah,
cumbersome, man.
yeah.
But
Well, I mean,
I have hunted with one a fair amount over the years when I had an injury to my shoulder and I
yeah,
couldn't use my compound for a while.
yeah. So it's pretty cool. Like it's got a little crank system that you use to cock it, and then it's got like I think it's a 1x8 power scope on it, and then it's just got a little dial under the scope, and you dial your yardage in, kind of like on a single pin sight on a compound,
Yeah.
except it's horizontal, and you just dial to your yardage. And I'm telling you, if you're inside 50 or 60 yards, you probably don't want to stack a group because you're probably going to Robin Hood it.
That's pretty good.
I mean, I was shooting easy 2-inch groups at 60 yards, like not even on a good rest or anything. So anyway, incredible piece of technology.
Yeah.
Ellie was really efficient with it. We go out in the stand the first afternoon. I'm holding the crossbow. She's sitting next to me. It's a 2-man ladder stand, and we're kind of over a little food plot in the woods. And we'd been sitting there a little over an hour or so. Of course, she says, Dad, I'm getting kind of bored. When are the deer going to show up? And of course, like within 5 minutes, I'm like, Ellie, there's a deer. And so there's a doe. She pops out straight out in front of us, and we're pretty high. We have pretty good concealment cover. But she starts walking right towards us across the food plot, so there's no cover directly between us and her. And I was just talking Ellie through it and just saying, we're going to relax. We're going to relax. Like I could already hear her breathing starting to pick up and stuff like that. And she did such a good job, man. Like there were a couple of trees kind of in the middle of the food plot, and I could tell the doe was going to veer and go around behind those trees. And so I said, because the shooting rail around the stand was a little bit too high for her to shoot while seated, so she was going to have to stand up to shoot down because, we were pretty close. And I said, as soon as the tree is between you and the deer, I want you to quickly but smoothly stand up. And so she comes around behind it. She does exactly what I said. She smoothly stands up. The doe pops out the other side without even pausing behind the tree. And she clears the other side. Ellie's already standing up in position. So now the doe starts kind of coming around, and she's quartering towards us a little bit. And I start slowly kind of lifting the crossbow up to put it, to hand it over to her. We've got a little skirt around the shooting rail, so that's concealed. And I'm easing it up to her, and I'm doing one of these deals where I'm kind of keeping my eye on the deer to make sure she doesn't make us while I'm doing it,
Mm-hmm.
But I steal a quick glance towards Ellie as I'm slipping her the crossbow, and I realize that as I'm slowly handing it over to her, she's slowly like sinking down, like doing one of these. Because she's nervous that the deer's going to see her, and she's doing it completely involuntarily, And I'm like, no, don't sit down. Then you're going to have to stand up again. And that's just, that's a lot of movement. So she stands on up, and I get her the crossbow. She gets up on the shooting rail. The deer turns broadside at 30 yards, and we just wait till, I wait till she's got her head up and her legs not back, and I tell Ellie, whenever you're ready. And she lets the arrow fly, and I see it go just right home behind the shoulder. Like she tucked it in the crease just perfectly. The deer makes like 2 big bounds, slows down to a trot, slows down to a walk, and then falls within 60 yards of the stand. Like we see her go down, and it was just like that humane, ethical bow kill just like that. And so now my daughter has also killed a deer with archery equipment. A crossbow, but still, like,
You don't need the caveat.
I know.
Archery is archery.
Yeah. But, I mean,
what a great experience, dude.
Dang. A 10-year-old having the nerve to hold it together through all that. And,
yeah. Man, that's what I fell in love with, too.
And just being that close to deer, regardless of what you're using to hunt with.
I mean, I have always been in love with bow hunting.
Yeah.
Just from early. So, and I love that because you have to figure out how to get close to them and then be able to maneuver and do all that. That's perfect.
Yeah, and I thought it was it really something that Craig said that really resonated with me was that sometimes hunting and shooting houses are great and they can help us really effectively hunt deer while keeping pressure to a minimum, but sometimes they feel a little bit too sterile and you don't get that same rush that you do, with a bow in your hand and nothing but air between you and the deer, and you can hear them crunching down on the acorns. I mean, that's the way it's supposed to be.
Mm-hmm. It's good stuff.
So it was a fun weekend.
Yeah. All right. Well, we want to wrap this episode up.
Charlotte probably wouldn't mind if we did.
No, that's a really special experience. And I was telling you before we got on the show, I wanted to wait to hear the story on the line so everybody could hear it with me.
Yeah.
And, it makes me want to get Evelyn out there.
Yeah.
And she's a little bit younger, so not quite ready, but it's definitely making me chomp at the bit.
Yeah. Well, imagine how little brother is chomping at the bit now.
Oh, man.
Like, he feels so left out.
Yeah, beside himself.
Oh, I know. So he's, so he's 5. I told him, I was like, buddy, I think we're going to have to wait at least one more year before we even start thinking about it. So, and it doesn't matter, like, for him on a youth rifle, like, he still can't even reach around the stock to the trigger. So we need a little bit more time.
Yeah.
So, scale of management, right?
Yeah, we've been getting a bunch of questions, and it seems like folks like for us to continue to address comments that are coming in, especially the things that are habitat. I mean, people just keep on and on telling us stay on habitat.
Well, I feel like people have been asking us more for habitat management stuff as opposed to turkey science.
No. Well, that's fine. I mean, they're getting it done, and I like that. We're giving them information that they can implement, and I like that. That's the whole point, right?
And we're using science to inform those recommendations, which is exactly what we're going to do today, talking about scale of management.
Yeah, we've been asked numerous times in various ways to focus on scale, and I guess this recent couple of comments that we've gotten, one of them I think was on YouTube or something, and then we've gotten some emails about it, and it's one of those things where you and I need that kind of feedback because the way that they relate it in those messages. We've talked about scale multiple times, but it's always within another discussion that's focused on something else. So it's not like we have been specifically addressing scale as the topic area.
Right.
And you and I had felt like we were doing a pretty good job of addressing this particular topic, and people still would like us to focus directly on it so that we can just address it directly.
Yeah. And maybe one of the reasons that we haven't taken this on very directly yet, although we're about to today, is that this concept of slack, right? And it was Fred Guthrie that came up with the term slack, right?
Yeah. And
it's the idea that you could have two very similar properties in terms of, their general location and things like that, the geographic region, the ecosystem, and one of them's managed a little bit differently than the others, or maybe has a little bit different proportional composition, but they could have the same number of turkeys. Yeah. That's the idea of slack, is that they could be equally productive. There's a range of conditions under which you can provide habitat, right?
Yeah.
So it's not like, a 10% change is necessarily going to always equate to a 10% change in the population. But I think we do have enough data now to come up with some heuristics about what your target should be. And if you end up a little plus or minus that, the good thing about Slack is that you'll still be okay.
Yeah. One, it's almost a requirement, right? Which two properties are the same?
Right.
There's always going to be inherent variability in the landscape. You've got variability not just within the property, but in what's around the property that could be influencing what you're seeing. So it's a good thing that we have Slack. We don't have to be really precise, but like you said, we do have kind of a range of what we need to accomplish in different areas of the wild turkey biology to make sure that they can be successful within that landscape.
Yes.
Okay, well, I think, when we were discussing this and how we were going to go about it, we kind of settled in on a few things that we wanted to cover. I think it would be good, and I've heard you cover this really well, so I'm just going to pose it to you to start with, and we'll pivot off of this. But in terms of what turkeys need from a habitat standpoint, let's try to break that down into what do those pieces of the pie look like. If I'm just a landowner as, a 500-acre parcel, what do I need that to look like in terms of proportions that we're dedicating to different things?
Yeah, so up until we completed the statewide gobbling study, I really didn't have a good answer for that. However, and this is a study that we've covered several times on this podcast, so if y'all are interested in hearing more about it, I encourage you to go back and listen to some of those old episodes, and we can even provide a link to the one where I covered it in depth in the show notes. But
do you remember what topic that was that we covered that in?
I don't remember the name of the episode.
We'll figure it out, Charlotte.
Yeah. So, anyways, we had these gobble recorders, ARUs, if you will, set up, all across the state on public land and private land. We ran those for 2 turkey seasons. They actually started well before turkey season and continued well after. And so when we got all that data back, we could look at trends and gobbling patterns, right? And one of the main trends that we were interested in looking at was what is the relative influence of property composition. So kind of at the landscape scale is what we would refer to that as, to gobbling activity. And what is the relative contribution of vegetation characteristics immediately around the listening device and how that drives gobbling activity. I don't know if I said that right. I kind of lost my train of thought there. But so essentially, what is vegetation at the property scale and vegetation in the stand scale, if you will? So think about a block of hardwoods or a block of pines. How does vegetation at that smaller scale affect gobbling probability too, right? Mm-hmm. So we looked at it at both those scales. And at the property level scale, the 2 most important factors that we found that affected gobbling activity were the amount of early successional cover across the property. And for each 1% increase in early successional cover across the property, the probability of daily gobbling went up by 10%. So you get a 100% increase. Yeah, so you get a 100% increase across a 10% increase in early succession.
Dang.
And then the second most important cover type in that analysis across Alabama was the proportion of bottomland hardwood forest. And gobbling probability increased 6% for each 1% increase in bottomland hardwood forest. And so that's exactly what you would expect. We know turkeys roost, loaf, and feed during fall and winter in those bottomland hardwood forests. Mm-hmm. And then we know that the early succession is primarily their breeding and their reproductive cover.
Yeah.
And so
just thinking about that, and this may be where you're going, but obviously there has to be some sort of threshold where that relationship starts to break down, right?
Because that's where I was going.
Okay. Yeah, and just thinking about that, it has to be because you can't have 50% of the landscape be early succession and 60% of it be bottomland hardwood. Yeah. There has to be some sort of trade-off.
Right, and we didn't have sites that had that composition. Okay,
where they
so
were extreme.
where it was that extreme, and so the greatest proportion of early succession that we saw in our study was about 30% of the property, and we saw gobbling probability increasing up to that 30% range, and we saw the
Okay.
same general trend with bottomland hardwood forest, and so
Wait, was the bottomland hardwood, what was the highest composition that you had on it?
it was about
Was
35% too. Yeah.
Okay. So, and you're saying that there was essentially this linear relationship that continued from 0 to 30.
Well, we
You
didn't try to model
continued
it
with,
out past that because we didn't have the data to speak to it.
right.
Yeah.
But that's what I'm saying. So if you
Right.
bind it within that,
Yeah.
it's just linear. Like
Yeah,
as you
that's right.
increase early succession, you continue to increase
That's
gobbling.
right. That's right.
So I just wanted to.
But we know if we got all the way to the extreme of 100% early succession, they've got nowhere to roost, right?
So yeah, and that was the point. Is and some like 100% open would be
Right.
bad,
Right.
because there's nowhere to roost,
Right.
right, and other things. So we know that it has to decline in quality at some point, but over the range from 0 to 30, you just continue to add value.
That's right.
As you get up to that 30. So
That's right.
based on your data, at least going up to 30% is still good.
Absolutely. And then especially when you think about the data that's come out of Tennessee that we've talked about so much, where you had less than 10% of the landscape in grassland or shrubland.
Yeah, 7%.
Yeah, and like half the hens were nesting there in that study.
45%.
Right. So I want and their nest success was almost 2 times greater, wasn't 2 times greater, significantly greater though, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was 2% per day, which worked out. Yeah, it took nesting success from the low 20% to, if they were using that vegetation type, it would be in 40-something%.
So it did double it.
Yeah, it was almost double, I think.
Yeah.
I think it was like 28 to 44 or something like that.
Right. And so that tells me that it's a limiting factor.
Yes.
And that I want more of it. And this is a conversation.
That's exactly what that means. It is, if you keep adding something and it continues to, you see a yield in terms of the productivity of turkeys, that means it was limiting them.
Right. And then the other side of that coin too is, we hear all these stories all the time about, oh, well, this hen nested in a roadside ditch, and this hen nested in on hardwood leaf litter in a closed canopy forest, and this hen nested in a clover food plot, and this hen nested in a ryegrass food plot. And me and my friend Craig that I was talking about earlier, that I went and hunted with last weekend, have had this conversation many times. And one thing that I said about it that really seemed to resonate with him, and in fact, he repeated it to me again this weekend, was that we want to overwhelm the hen with good decisions. Just overwhelm her with good decisions. Yeah. Because apparently they don't always make them on their own. So I feel like if a third of the property is in good, nesting / brooding cover, she's much more likely to make a good decision.
Well, let's think about that from, just let me opine for a minute.
Gladly, I will step aside and let you climb up on your soapbox.
Well, we've heard arguments about whether or not they're strong selectors.
Yeah.
Right, for nest site selection. We know that we find nests in bad places and we find them in good places.
Yeah.
We have a series of analyses here that align with the Tennessee studies showing there's pretty strong selection. We haven't published yet for some vegetation characteristics. But there's other work that suggests that it's weaker selection.
Yeah.
Like there's not strong selection for vegetation characteristics. So let's just pretend for a minute that it's completely random.
Yeah.
They're just walking around in the landscape and they decide, you know what? I need to lay an egg. I'm just going to do it right here.
Right.
No consideration for anything outside of that's where they happen to be.
Mm-hmm.
Your logic would mean that more of the time she would just happenstance end up in a good condition.
That's right.
And let's go to the opposite end of that spectrum. Let's say that hen is like, you know what? I got to lay this egg, but I am not doing it until I find a good place. she's also going to do better in that same landscape, which is now it's more like she's got so many choices.
Mm-hmm.
She can choose something good because she's not limited by that anymore. So regardless of where we're at in that argument, having an abundance of good options is still better.
Yeah. And to, I don't know, kind of opine on that a little bit further is to use your term.
Please.
We don't know why different hens make different choices about where they nest. Which is kind of an interesting question. Is it just that some of them, is it juveniles tend to make bad decisions more often, or is it less experienced mothers? Is it just, some birds are smarter than others?
Well, and there's not even that strong a data that I have seen where we have repeated choices by the same individual.
Right.
Like we don't know that the same hen always picks bad over and over again.
Right.
Or good.
Right.
There is some, I've heard people say that there are hens that make superior choices or do or more productive than others, but there's not very strong evidence that I have seen published on that.
Yeah.
That being said, I also have heard and have thought of it as sort of being competitive.
Mm-hmm.
And what I mean by that is, the first hen picks a place, and then that place is now not accessible for other hens to pick that place. Like there's some amount of area that if I nest here, nobody else will nest there. So you kind of, that could definitely dictate the scale at which you're doing it.
I wonder what the mechanism of that would be, though, because I can't see a hen running another hen off.
Well, that it's really interesting to think about because now I'm trying to remember which historical researcher it was.
Did I take us that far off the tracks?
No, I think it's great discussion. One of the historical researchers, and I'm wanting to say Porter, but I don't think that's right. One of them was talking about just sort of writing about how hens would nest, and they really wanted to be secretive about it, even to them. And I found that interesting because that suggests that they are actively trying to conceal themselves from each other.
Mm-hmm.
But there's been multiple studies, including one just recently, showing that there is multiple maternity in the same nest. So we do see some nest dumping.
I could see them wanting to conceal their nest location because they don't want other birds' eggs dumped in their nest. Yeah. But if another hen is just nesting in close proximity, is that really a conflict of interest? I don't know.
Well, also I think you could make an argument that based on some ecological principles that putting more nests in a small area would make it more worthwhile for a predator to hunt in it, or more. It would make might cause prey switching to focus on nest or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, if
I could
twice the number of hens, you got twice the number of scent.
Yeah, like there are some reasons that you might expect that kind of behavior, like some sort of territorial behavior. And then I was getting briefed on our nesting this year, and I think I even sent you a message about it, but I don't believe you can remember what I told you.
Yeah, I remember.
But I just asked. I was
the gist of it, but not the distance.
Wait a minute. We had hens almost 200 tagged. I think it was 180 something birds tagged this year. And we had hens tagged, a bunch of them on 5 sites. So I was like, okay, well, out of all the turkeys, what was the example where they were nested closest together? Like we had 2 tagged hens and they were both sitting on a nest at the same time on the same day. How far was that apart for the closest 2?
Yeah. And I think my initial guess was like a couple 100 yards or something, wasn't it? 100 yards or
I don't remember what you guessed, but do you remember what it was?
It was much less than that.
Yeah. It was 8 yards. Right at almost 27 feet. So I told you in the message, I said, shit, those hens were looking at each other.
Yeah.
They were in a pine savanna where there's vegetation waist high.
Yeah.
Excellent nesting cover. And they're sitting there where they can almost see each other.
Yeah.
8 yards away from each other, both sitting on the nest.
Do you remember if they were successful or not?
Neither of them were, so that might be the problem. So it doesn't prove that there's no territoriality during nesting, right?
It proves
that's an anecdote,
right?
But I also was like, wait a minute, 8 yards?
Yeah,
like they can take turns going on their daily excursion and watch each other's nest form. You know what I'm saying? Like,
yeah, they were setting up a co-op.
Well, Jenny over there just laid another egg. I heard her.
Yeah,
it's like she's right there.
You good over there, girl? Just keep pushing.
I mean, they're probably standing up and just talking to each other during the day.
Yeah, it's funny.
So I just couldn't believe that. So I was like, okay. I've been under the impression that they are not going to nest that close, but that, at least that one example they did.
Yeah.
I'd love to hear from other researchers how close have they observed, because I've never heard anybody say that I can recollect. I've never heard anybody say how close were the closest two they've ever had nest together.
Yeah, well, that's not something we often think about analyzing,
Yeah, but I would really like to know that, because
it affects scale of management.
Yeah. If I have a 5-acre patch of nesting cover, how many nests can be put in there?
Right.
Based on that, it's a few.
Yeah. Well, and I've been guilty before in the past talking about burning during the nesting season and not being that concerned about it because of how hens space themselves so far apart. You're unlikely within a single burn unit to really burn up that many nests, but you just provided a counterpoint to that.
Yeah, and again, I want to make it very clear to people out there, that is an anecdote.
Yeah.
But I know for a fact we had 2 tagged hens that nested 8 yards apart at the same time, where they're both sitting on the nest and incubating at the same time.
Right.
I cannot prove they were looking at each other, but they were close enough to do that. Yeah. I mean, so that's my point of it. It's definitely important to scale of management, and it made me think a little differently about scale.
Yeah,
and I thought y'all would think it was fun to hear that little anecdote as well.
Yeah, and I don't know, to continue to build off of that, I guess, even if there are instances where hens can nest really closely together, as we start to go through these numbers, neither of us is suggesting that any of these cover types need to be in a contiguous block, right? We generally want each of the necessary cover types well interspersed throughout the property, well distributed.
Yeah. Well, and on the property that we're talking about, it is managed exceptionally well.
Mm-hmm.
There is a large portion of the landscape that is open pine and openings that are high quality, herbaceous dominated communities. There's lots of nesting cover and brooding cover in that example.
Yeah.
So they still made that choice even though they were in a sea of nesting cover.
Yeah.
But I also want to reiterate the point that anecdote isn't telling me that that's ideal either.
Yeah.
Exactly what you said is what I would still say. It would be more ideal for you if you're going to have a certain proportion of your available land in this cover type. It would be far better for it to be distributed across the property rather than clustered in one portion of the property.
Mm-hmm.
But there's probably a point at which it gets too small.
Well, that's true too. Yeah. All right.
3 square yards of early succession is not enough. I actually use this example when I'm talking about this in habitat management. And it's a facetious example on purpose.
Yeah.
But we'll be standing there in the class and I'll be like, okay, well, how much? How much do we need? And they're like, well, enough. And it's like, well, what does that mean? because it's always super vague. And it's like, well, we need an adequate amount. Well, what does an adequate amount mean?
Yeah.
And then I'm like, okay, let's say I have the most pristine brooding cover you've ever seen in a petri dish. That's not enough.
Yeah.
Right? We know that has to be at a larger scale than that, but where is enough?
Yeah.
And that's a hard thing to answer.
Yeah.
And then I also tell them we have the same problem. Having exceptional brooding cover for 1 minute isn't long enough either.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So we might have problems in either temporal or spatial scale.
It's funny that you use that example because I also use a facetious example in class that's very similar to that, where I talk about it's in the deer habitat portion of my habitat class. And I talk about how several early studies failed to really find an association between fawn bed site composition and probability of predation. But several years ago, we looked at that at a larger scale, and we actually looked at the vegetation conditions throughout the fawn's home range and found out that that was a very significant predictor of predation. So it's not, so I'll say the same thing in that class that, I'm standing up in the front of the room. There's usually a table up there, and I'm like, I could have a patch of ideal fawning cover the size of this table or even the size of this room, and it could be the most pristine cover ever. But if that's all that I have across the entire property, I've just set up a buffet, right? Because everybody knows where to go when they want to eat a fawn.
Yeah, and actually, it's funny you should bring up that example because we modeled this. Coulter Chitwood led the thing, and I was a second author on this paper. But in the landscape we were in, the high quality fawning cover in that landscape was really restricted to narrow strips associated with wetlands because it was sandhill and it burned frequently.
Yeah,
the way that it was being burned and everything. The cover in the uplands was fairly poor.
Even for hens in that study.
Yeah. Just because of a combination of factors, but the whole point was when the cover was arranged such as it was, what we actually found was that the better the cover the fawn selected, or the more it used the hider strategy by hiding in cover, the more likely it was to get predated as a result, which was contrary to what should have been expected.
And it was probably because in that context, coyotes were queuing on that cover type.
Yeah, and it was really easy to hunt.
Right.
So I use that as the example of why we don't want it to be long and narrow. Because it's super easy to hunt.
Sure. So should we get to our proportions now?
Yeah, let's talk about the proportions. Yeah. I was trying to just start us with that and get some loose proportions, and then we'd have some of this other discussion, but you had other plans. So
okay. My bad.
No, it's good.
Okay. So
I like the spontaneous discussion.
Yeah, so I'm shooting for 30% brooding / nesting cover. Okay, I want a third of my property in brooding / nesting, and the reason that I say it that way is because oftentimes, especially in the South, where we're using a lot of prescribed fire, whether an area constitutes brooding or nesting is going to depend on time since fire. And so if I'm burning on a 2-year fire return interval and I'm burning 15% each year of that overall 30%, that means that half of it is going to be in its second growing season post fire, and half of it will be burned in the current year. And the stuff burned in the current year will be more suitable to brooding from a structure perspective, and the stuff that was burned the previous year is going to be more suitable to nesting from a structure perspective. So that's why I say the brooding / nesting. So it really breaks down to kind of 15-15, but those areas are shifting, jockeying, if you will, each year back and forth between what need they're meeting.
Now, how much slack is in that?
I have no idea.
Would you like to opine on it?
You mean how much can we have before, how much can we go plus or minus on that?
Yeah, what would you say? I don't think that data exists.
It does not. I would guess, plus or minus 10% maybe.
Yeah, I would have said that same thing.
Yeah.
So somewhere between 20 and 40, but 30 is probably pretty good.
Right. Right.
And I will say, I don't remember the exact number that they gave, but in the Wild Turkey Management book, I remember seeing the same thing. It was about 25%, as far as I recall.
I remember seeing that too, and it was remarkable to me when I read it because I independently came up with that number before reading that in the text. So I thought that was really interesting how closely aligned we were on those.
Yeah. I remember that too because I saw you present on this when we were doing one of the habitat management seminars that we did last year. And then I read that in the book. We might have even talked about this on the air because I think we talked about like nesting cover specifically back in the spring. And I think it was in that chapter.
Okay.
But I remember talking to you about that, wondering if you had gotten it from the book and you were like,
that's right. Yeah.
I came up with an independent with that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, which I also was in a very similar mindset before I had seen that in the book too, and before I saw you present it. So it's kind of interesting. We have independently come up with a very similar proportion from our various experiences,
right.
And it's literally the same as what's in the book.
That's right. Yeah. So as far as that 30%, oftentimes on properties in the Deep South, a significant portion of that is going to be pine woodland. So, pine that's been thinned that probably has a minimum of 30 to 40% sunlight coming in. And you can do the same thing in hardwoods. It's not limited to pine. It may be a little bit more difficult.
I was just going to say it should probably, and used to definitely be the same in the upland hardwoods.
That's right.
Central hardwoods and Appalachians.
That's right. So you can get that done with a commercial hardwood harvest in some places, or you could use FSI that we've talked about many times on this podcast to achieve that. But I'm trying to get about 30-40% sunlight on the ground. I'm burning most of those areas in the Deep South every couple of years. If you're on really low fertility soil, you might be able to get away with a little bit longer fire return interval. If you're on really rich soil, you may have to burn every year on areas that you intend for birding, and that kind of changes the math a little bit. That applies if you're as you go further north, the growing seasons are going to be shortening, so you're not going to, the succession doesn't occur quite as quickly, so maybe you get away with a little bit longer return interval there too. But a significant portion of it's going to be in the woodlands, but I still try in each of my management units, if it's a larger property or if it's, a smaller property, you could just have one, but I'm looking to have at least about 5% of that in true early succession. And by that, I mean an area that is not forested in any way. It's an open field.
Yeah. Well, I like that. I like those recommendations a lot. Another thing that, I've teased about it and given some anecdotes about it. Based on our poll work, I have really gained an appreciation for the difference in importance of the woodland brooding cover versus the old field brooding cover. Both very productive and can be very important. And I think based on our work, I'm not going to say definitively yet, but I'm pretty confident that both are going to serve pretty important roles in brooding success. And the other thing I would add to that when we're thinking about scale, I know we haven't talked about scale in terms of actual acreage, but maybe we'll go to that. When I'm working with landowners and we are looking at fields, it's very common that field is less than an acre, certainly not more than 2 acres most of the time. So there's obviously bigger fields than that, but that's the range we're normally working with most of their openings.
Yeah.
And when you're in a landscape and some people are in this landscape and cannot be in a different context because they don't own the land, like it's timberland or whatever. When the woods aren't providing high quality brooding cover, it puts a lot more pressure on you to provide that high quality brooding cover in the fields. or on
That's
roadsides,
right.
places that are getting high sunlight, and you might be very limited. And I know that there are a lot of our listeners that are, because they tell us that all the time. So, and we've had an episode where we talk about what your options might be to increase the opportunity for brooding cover in that landscape. We'll link it. But when you have the opportunity to have that woodland, not only do you reduce the pressure on that field for brooding cover, so you kind of there's a lot of slack, right, in which one you're providing it through. Mm-hmm. But when you have them combined, you can think about them increasing the effective area that's in brooding cover. Mm-hmm. So you might have a field that's 2 acres that's high quality brooding cover, and then you might have woods that you've opened up into a woodland scenario that you've just burned right next to it. And now that effectively is one contiguous patch of high quality brooding cover. And, they would and can use both for successful brooding.
That's right.
So, when you're thinking about scale,
and maybe even at different times of the day.
Right. And I think that's what our work will show fairly compellingly, but I don't want to go farther than that yet. That having that opportunity for them adjacent to each other is probably going to be important.
Yeah.
So, but my point is, your brooding cover could be accomplished, and same thing with nesting cover or roosting or loafing can be accomplished in different cover types that might collectively be a larger footprint. In your given parcel size for that,
right?
That you're dedicating to that.
Yep.
So, and I even try to build that into the management. When you have a field, and then you're going to manage as a woodland adjacent to it, or you can use edge feathering, or you can daylight roads to connect patches. All of those things are increasing the effective area.
Utility rights of way, roadsides. Yeah. There's a lot of wasted areas that can be managed, for that objective.
And that, in an essence, if you had 2 isolated patches that are a little bit too small to serve as high quality vegetation for whatever your target is, let's say brooding. But effectively what connectivity between those 2 patches is doing is making their effective footprint larger. So it's like the 2 smaller patches, by connecting them, are making them one larger patch.
So that's one thing that I've increasingly put focus on when working with landowners to manage their property, is that connectivity aspect, which I know that you've, really harped on for a long time. And I've been thinking about it a long time too, but I've been focusing kind of on the road network and using that as connectivity.
Yeah.
But Craig said something, Craig Harper, that is, at the last landowner field tour that he and I did together, which was that turkeys live and die by their eyes. And so they their probability of getting depredated is going to go way down on a property where almost everywhere they go, that they could detect a coyote slipping up on them from at least 100, 200 yards away. And I started thinking about that and realized that the places and the specific properties where I feel like I see the densest turkey populations are the ones that are the most open, that have the fewest, kind of thick areas that maybe a turkey wouldn't even walk through if they, physically are prevented from going in there.
Yeah.
But even if they could get in there, a lot of times we'll see them avoid those areas, and it makes sense because their eyes are their most effective anti-predator mechanism. So I've been focusing a lot more on making sure that we don't have too much of the property in unusable space or space that turkeys can't walk through.
Yeah. And let me also give something that I think might resonate with a lot of folks. I didn't really start appreciating it, but I did a field day with Mike Chamberlain one time, and he had GPS tag data that he showed. And I don't remember if he was just showing an individual in a landscape, but what he showed was essentially the road network, all of the dots in this landscape wherever they were studying it, all of the hen dots were in that. Like every single point almost was on the road.
Mm-hmm.
And he was making the point at the time, and I didn't fully appreciate it at the time, but now I really do because I've been on several properties now in Florida like this. The entire landscape, the woods were too thick to use.
Mm-hmm.
The road network was the only way the turkeys could get around in the landscape.
Mm-hmm.
And that's exactly the opposite of what you just said.
Yeah.
We've now, if you're in a situation where the only place you ever see your turkeys is on the roads, that's probably a good indicator that the woods are too thick.
Yes.
Or it could be a good indicator.
Yeah.
I guess if you're managing the roads to be exceptional turkey
Well,
habitat.
that's true. Yeah. That's a different story.
Yeah. But, that's my point of bringing that up. I've been on a couple of properties. In fact, one property where I saw this play out, I was doing the youth hunt or the women's hunt last year, and I had a young lady with me out turkey hunting for the first time, and I was looking around. I was like, I don't know if there's any turkeys on this place.
Yeah,
the whole place is too thick, and every time we turned a corner, there was turkeys on the road.
Yeah,
and we ended up getting one, but. I was sitting there like, man, there's nowhere for them to use,
right?
Because it's too thick, and that. You're kind of setting turkeys up for failure in that context.
Yeah.
As opposed to that more open landscape that you're talking about. And, where they can see a long ways in every direction. But the other problem there is you want there to be vegetation. It's just not taller than they are, right?
Yes, that's right.
So you're not necessarily, you're not looking for a really high visibility where there's no vegetation at the ground level.
Yeah, you don't want them walking on leaf litter and pine needles.
Right. You want them to be in herbaceous communities that they can see over and navigate through. And especially if it's a hen with poults, they need to be able to navigate and be under the cover of that herbaceous community.
The one caveat that I will add to that is in my roosting areas and my loafing areas, if I've got a real problem with, like dense shrubby cover or like brambles or something like that,
and that to be open.
I want to keep that open. I want to get rid of, like if I've got a bunch of like sparkleberry or privet or, kind of just shrubs in the mid-story, I'll try to get that out because I want them to be able to see clearly when they're approaching the roost in the evening and their eyesight's not as good as it is when it's full daylight. I want them to be able to see clearly, and then when they go to fly down in the morning, I want to be able to see what's clearly underneath them as well. And I think that a lot of this, including what you just covered, is super important given the episode that we just did, outlining the fact that hen survival has decreased over time, and it may be, what's explaining declines in some areas.
Yeah. And we have some really good data coming. We're still waiting on it to get through peer review, but suggesting that might be a really important factor.
Yeah.
The other thing I wanted to say is, there's slack, but there's also, I don't want people to think, oh, this is the only way.
Right.
We're not saying that having some hardwood flats that are fairly clean in the understory, that's pretty common.
Yeah.
And I would, if you get up into the Appalachians, it's the norm.
Yeah.
That's not to say that having some of that around isn't a good thing.
Right.
It's just you don't necessarily want your landscape to be dominated by it because that herbaceous community is providing the cover needed for nesting and brooding and insect production and seed production for food. And we want to have some level of that present. That doesn't mean it has to be ubiquitously present, right? We have different stands that are in different conditions, and having some that's that more open loafing area where they can scratch around for acorns or whatever is not a bad thing, but you don't want your whole property to look like that.
And most properties mostly look like that. That's why we talk so much about early successional covers, because it's not that difficult to find a closed canopy forest.
We've got a number of studies showing that early succession is a single-digit proportion of the landscape in the study areas, and it's in multiple states now. So we're focused on that for that reason. What would you say? And I think we're going to have to speculate a little bit here. But what would you say is the size in terms of the acreage of a plot, or like a parcel that you're going to dedicate to nesting cover?
Just a single block?
Yeah, just like if I really like to try to connect different resources like that throughout the landscape, and that's making the size of each individual parcel a little less important.
Yeah.
But let's just say we want, sort of like we'd treat a food plot. Like, what size are we looking for?
Yeah.
Minimum.
Well, this is all just opinion at this point. We really don't have any data on it.
This is another reason we haven't covered scale really directly.
Yeah.
Because it's really hard actually to even study this.
It is. So, like with a field, for example, I usually do not start breaking it down into separate management units until I have at least 1 or 2 acres that I can allocate to each. So if I have a 5-acre field, I might divide it up and have it on a different disturbance regime where 2.5 acres gets disturbed one year so that it's brooding, and 2.5 the next year so it's nesting. Mm-hmm. When I start thinking about managing for that in the woods, it's generally a larger scale, and I'm thinking, something 5, 7, 10 acres, something like that.
Yeah.
On larger properties, so we start getting up into several 100-acre property. I generally am like, with the wooded areas, I'm looking at about 15, 20 acre, maybe 10 acre sometimes, management units. And then when I scale that up we start thinking about a 1,000-acre property, a 2,000-acre property, I might scale that up to like a 40 or 50-acre management unit.
When do you start getting uncomfortable with the size of the unit in terms of being too large?
Definitely when you start getting up north of 50 acre, like if you're talking about burning a contiguous tract that's, 75 or 100 acres, I feel like that's too big. Mm-hmm. If the goal is to maximize turkeys.
Yeah. I think that's an important
caveat, because that's not everyone's objective, and we get lots of complaints about public land that's managed differently.
Yeah. Well, and even in that case, like the public land often has multiple objectives.
Yeah.
And its a principal objective is often not even wildlife.
Right. But we don't have to go too far down that rabbit hole, though.
Yeah, it also maybe 50,000 acres. We're going to burn that in 10-acre units. Like, that's not very easy to do.
Yeah. And generally speaking, I actually had I think he was a biologist with the Nature Conservancy that approached me after a talk I gave this past summer, where I had talked about this very topic specific to scale of fire and turkey management. And, he was saying that, man, that undercuts us. We're trying to return fire to the landscape, and we're going to have to burn at scale if we're ever going to get this done. And, the first thing I reminded him is, your objectives are different than the objectives that I was speaking to during that talk, number one. But in general, I agree with that concept. Fire is not what's causing turkey declines.
Yeah, even on the places that people are complaining about.
Yeah. I generally would want, even though it's not ideal, I like to see fire being implemented at scale on, 5-figure 1,000-acre public tracts, because otherwise, they're going to burn single-digit percentages of it, and it's going to look like the rest of the landscape that we just talked about with 7% early succession.
I have made that point a few times here when, we become the target. We're not the ones making those management decisions or implementing it, but we're often talking about fire management, and because of that, we get targeted with these questions or concerns. And I have pointed this out in a couple places in Florida. If we don't having fire, you have turkeys, right? We may not be at the optimal scale to maximize turkey productivity and all that, but having fire is allowing them to be there. And if you subtract fire, they won't be there.
Yeah.
It gets way too thick real fast.
Yeah.
To where turkeys are now absent.
Yeah.
But, that's what we're kind of teetering on. I'm kind of making that point. Like, yeah, I understand this may not be the optimal way to do it, but if you subtract that practice out, you subtract the species out. And quail are even more sensitive to that.
You just prompted a fairly provocative thought in my mind just now. And it's that...
Is it a closing thought?
Well, we're starting to wind down here, so I'll leave folks with something to chew on. And it's that, in those situations that we described, and let's just go ahead and say, like, on national forest, where the average... Like, I know of a national forest where their average burn size is about 500 acres. There's a good bit of that is actually implemented that overlaps with turkey nesting. In the current environment that we're in, based on our data on hen survival, it, could be benefiting the population to burn at that scale to keep that level of openness to try to increase hen survival.
That would certainly overcome any reproductive consequence to the nesting and brooding.
Yeah.
The hen survival is way more important.
Yeah.
Now, I know people out there, we're not going to sacrifice nests for hen. I hear all that stuff. But the reality of the situation is hen survival has declined, apparently, based on our meta-analysis. And you're right. Even a few percent increase in hen survival would overcome a several percentage more decrease in nesting or brooding success.
Well, and if hens don't survive, you don't have any nests to burn up.
Yeah.
You don't have to worry about it.
Yeah, it turns out dead hens don't nest. And
gobblers certainly don't make nests. So
yeah, on YouTube, I think Charlotte put that thumbnail on it, dead hens don't reproduce or something. So yeah, it's fairly accurate.
That's a fun little thought to kind of wrap this up on, though.
No, I think it's an important point also to bring it back to the average landowner. I do see this where people are afraid to do anything because they're going to hurt it.
Mm-hmm.
Like they don't want to burn because they don't want to burn up the nesting cover. They don't want to burn because, they're making it too open or whatever.
Yeah.
There's all kinds of things that you hear.
Yeah.
About. But, I think we need to keep in mind the long-term objective of increasing productivity, and we're trying to maximize our management to maximize that. But, sometimes you got to break a few eggs to make an omelet. Right.
I heard a very wise person say that once.
I'm not trying to say go out there and burn nest up. That's not what I'm saying at all. But
that's what I took home from it.
If you're afraid to implement any habitat management for fear that you're going to mess it up, that can be a hindrance.
Yeah. Yep.
So, well, I will say again, when we're talking about the scales of management, remember that about that slack. But also the way that it's arranged with respect to, like we were talking about with the brooding cover in the fields next to the woods that are managed as good brooding cover, or the scale of burning and how that's affecting nesting cover, that sort of thing. The arrangement really can affect how much slack there is on that. So,
yeah,
the shape of a 100-acre burn unit could dictate how positive or negative it is as well.
Yeah. And that's what I do when I start, like if I'm going to make a management plan that includes a map, that's one of the things that I start out doing is labeling everything for its current utility to turkeys and then seeing how that's distributed across the map. And if all of it's on the east side of the property and there's none on the west, we need to do something on the west side if we can.
Yeah, we start trying to figure out, and I like to compartmentalize it and kind of have these quadrants or something.
I do that
on the property,
especially on larger properties. It's almost kind of you replicate management units across it.
Start to have like a sub level that you're trying to accomplish your 30% within.
Exactly.
And then distribute that around the property.
Exactly. So, yep.
Yeah.
Well, cool.
Well, I'm sure folks will have more questions about that. We're going to have a few people that didn't like what we had to say, but it is what it is.
If that never happens, you're probably not saying much worth listening to.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's the reality of the situation. sometimes doing things less than ideal is better than not doing things at all.
Mm-hmm.
But we should be trying to, strive to be as ideal as possible also. I understand that.
I wake up every day thinking that, Marcus.
I'm going to strive to be ideal. All right.
It's more I strive to be optimal.
All right. Well, I think we've lost the two listeners that were still here. So thanks, everybody, for listening. Hope y'all appreciated this episode. We've certainly got plenty of requests for it, so we'll come back to it if we need to go about it a different way, or if you still have questions, but keep them coming, and we'll keep covering these topics.
Awesome. See y'all. Wild Turkey Science is part of the Natural Resources University podcast network and is made possible by Turkeys for Tomorrow, a grassroots organization dedicated to the wild turkey. To learn more about TFT, check out turkeysfortomorrow.org.